Hello, everybody out there in radio land. It is once again I, your host. This is Andrew Argo, and y'all are listening to Media Cyphers only on 89.1 WIDR or online at widerfm.org. So we're going to transition. We had that interview with Catherine Joyce talking about the right-wing assault on education, and I wanted to give an update to a story we've been talking about over the last couple of weeks. The Michigan GOP has made its picks for Secretary of State and Attorney General candidates, and as we mentioned, they definitely leaned as far right as they could in their selections. And I'm going to be reading some bits and pieces from MLive's coverage, as well as a little bit from World Socialist website. And first of all, again, we talk about like media, holding the media accountable. So this article from MLive by Melissa Frick, it does do some of its due diligence by pointing out excuse me. Well, actually, actually, it doesn't do its due diligence. I'm sorry, I was mistaken. So, I guess what I was trying to lean into with that is that the main things that these candidates are leaning into are, the specter of election fraud and parental rights or choice. And that's even how the headline is framed. Election integrity, parental rights among the top campaign issues for Michigan GOP ahead of 2020 election. And one thing this article fails to do, even like kind of wrapping this headline in such neutral terms, obscures the fact that the election integrity issues that these candidates are bringing up are not actual election integrity issues. They are not the actual things that, make America rank something like 42nd in a list of democracies worldwide. It is not the actual issues that are making us resemble more of an autocracy or an oligarchy than a democracy. It is, again, going back to the theories and lies that were being spread from the Trump campaign on down in the fall of 2020. So the problem is when you frame it like that, like, everybody wants better elections. Everybody wants our elections to have more integrity. But you're giving these candidates a pass because they're not actually fighting for election integrity. They are soldiering on lies that were built to kind of sow doubt about the validity of, Joe Biden as president and, again, for Trump to, see the conditions for a coup. This isn't really, I'm not doing a bunch of like controversial guesswork here. This is pretty widely embraced view of what happened, even by some folks on the right. So I guess like some, I should say, like a lot of the old neocons. There's a handful of people. There's not many of them. But if you are not enraptured in the Trump cult, or you do not think it's politically expedient to bend the knee to the orange one, then that's typically the common sense reading of those events. And I feel like, again, American journalists have this kind of skewed idea of objectivity. You're supposed to present, like, quote unquote, both sides of the issue. That's not what real objectivity means. Objectivity means you're supposed to find the truth. So if one side is objectively wrong or incorrect or lying, then it is your job to point that out. And I think this article kind of does a disservice, gives them, again, more credibility than they deserve by framing it as, an earnest desire for election integrity. While, again, it cites the allegations of election fraud as stemming from what Donald Trump said, it does not point out, again, that those claims are verifiably false and were basically laughed out of many courtrooms, even by Trump-appointed judges. So, going on to just note, the GOP, they voted to endorse Matthew DePerno and Christina Caramo. Matthew DePerno is going to be running for Attorney General, and Christina Caramo is going to be running for Secretary of State. And they both built their candidacies around false claims that the 2020 presidential election was fraudulent. So giving the journalists a little bit of credit there. They do point out that the claims are false. But again, the rest of the article does, especially that headline. And again, a lot of times the writer of these articles did not necessarily have control of headlines. The MLive might have wanted to go forward with a more neutral headline, but so some credit be given. It does point out the claims are false, but that is one line in a much longer article. So anyway, both of those candidates were endorsed by President Trump. And as we mentioned in a previous episode, they've both got very strong right-wing views about the stuff. They want to sue Jocelyn Benson, Gretchen Whitmer, and Dana Nessel for election malfeasance that, again, did not happen, or at least did not happen in the way that Republicans claimed it happened. As we pointed out, if anything, a lot of the election malfeasance, we see it as institutional. It's based on gerrymandering, money in politics, and when it comes to the deletion of actual votes, that typically happened more with people more demographically disposed to vote for Biden, poor voters and voters of color. What you saw in 2020 was basically such an outpouring of people who were sick of Donald Trump that it overclocked the baked-in, voter suppression mechanisms that were in place, which again is a big reason why Republicans are redoubling their efforts since 2020 to impose even more the voter suppression. So it goes on to say, again, just to get a taste of some of the rhetoric here, DePerno has promised to prosecute the people who corrupted the 2020 election and allowed fraud to permeate the entire election system. Which, again, the kind of fraud that he's talking about did not actually happen. Whether from Benson's fraudulent mail-in ballot campaign, misappropriation of HAVA funds, or the deletion and destruction of voting records. The latter, there's no proof that happened. I'm not exactly sure what they're referring to with HAVA funds, but something that I'd like to hit on time and time again is this funny Republican game they talk about with the mail-in ballots. Again, 2018, let's go back to 2018. Wildly popular, bipartisan supported voting expansion package that included no reason mail-in absentee ballots. That was something that was supported by both Democrats and Republicans, rank and file Democrats and Republicans and independents, by a wide berth in that election. Something 80%, something like that. So turning around and calling something, basically saying it was illegal for Benson to offer mail-in ballots to everybody, when literally the voters of Michigan literally asked for that by something like an 80% margin, only a mere 2 years before 2020. That is peak revisionist history right there, and it needs to be called out. So he goes in and talk about ghost votes or absence of. He's talking about the election systems that used to process ballots and tabulate votes. Also, DePerno talked about CRT, and He talked about fighting for parental rights in schools. This is how they're framing it, as parental rights. The rights, basically the right of white parents to make sure their children don't have to learn or talk about race, which is pretty funny coming from, like, the anti-snowflake crowd. Their main argument around all of this, it's not even that the information, they're not claiming that the information is false. They're claiming that this information will make their children feel bad. Oh no. And, and I gotta say, that's not how kids process things. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. But, this whole idea that it's going to, emotionally devastate their children, that's not actually what happens. Children are very perceptive and, can change their worldviews based on new information. And what you actually end up seeing with a lot of kids is solidarity with anti-racist struggle and a better understanding of institutional racism. And that's the thing that these Republicans and conservatives are actually afraid of. So talking about that, he said, again, this article, I do want to give credit, CRT is not actually taught in Michigan K-12 schools. It is a graduate level academic framework that examines how racial groups are affected differently by legal systems and institutions. So some good fact checking from MLive here. And conservative activists in Michigan across the country have packed school board meetings this year to denounce CRT, which is actually something we talked a little bit about in our Catherine Joyce interview. But he goes so far, Matthew DePerno has gone so far as he's vowed to ban classroom teaching of CRT. He said, are designed to make our children hate their country, parents, and God. Oh, man. That's pretty far afield. And, again, if learning the truth about history makes somebody hate something, then what does that tell you about the truth and the history? But anyway, on day one, I will issue an opinion declaring CRT unconstitutional and banning this divisive concept. I will end this hateful ideology and advance Michigan as a place of freedom and America First principles. So that's got to be maybe the wildest thing in here. He wants to prosecute the Whitmer and Nassau and Benson. That's pretty wild. But the idea that you're going to ban or call teaching of history unconstitutional because it's divisive? You think it's a hateful ideology? How is it hateful? You have to actually explain that through. It'd be very interesting to see what the legal brief there looks like. But again, that is so ridiculously extreme. The left or the Democrats, this democratic centrist would never even consider, calling, you can't ban or, call it. America is a very First Amendment absolutist country. We won't even consider banning Nazi speech. Yet at the same time, this guy wants to make CRT or his version of whatever nebulous thing he thinks CRT is, as unconstitutional. That's some wild stuff, folks. So again, I think that article from MLive, credit for doing some good fact checking. But what as often happens is, especially with that headline, we're kind of painted this picture of false neutrality. But good on the writer Melissa Frick for telling it like it is when it comes to what CRT is and the false nature of the election fraud claims. And I'm going to just read a little bit from the World Socialist website take on it, and I think this one also gives a little bit more important, broader context and history to some of these issues. So again, talking about Matthew DePerno and Karamo were both endorsed by Trump. The two are fanatical supporters of Trump's claim that the 2020 election was stolen, and their political standing within the Republican Party is based entirely on the issue, as neither has ever held public office. Karamo is the first election denier to win a Republican nomination for Secretary of State in this election cycle. A dozen other such candidates are seeking the nomination in upcoming primaries. In some cases, as in Georgia, they are directly challenging incumbent Republicans who refuse Trump's pleas to overturn the results of the November 2020 election and quote-unquote find enough votes to tip the state's electoral college votes to him. The purpose of this coordinated campaign is to seize control of the electoral machinery in key battleground states ahead of the 2024 presidential election to ensure that Trump or some other fascistic Republican candidate will prevail. Matthew DePerno, a Kalamazoo lawyer, unfortunately, came to prominence through a lawsuit challenging the 2020 election results in Antrim County, a small, predominantly Republican county in the northwest part of the state. Antrim initially reported that Democrat Joe Biden defeated Trump in the county. After investigating the unlikely result, local officials found the next morning that the county clerk, a Republican loyalist, had made a number of mistakes in tabulating the votes, which had been correctly counted at the precinct level. The results were corrected immediately, and accurate results were submitted to the state government in Lansing. The mistake was rapidly fixed and had no impact on the outcome of the Michigan contest, which Biden won by 154,000 votes. Trump carried rural Antrim County by 9,748 votes to Biden's 5,960, a margin of just under 4,000 votes. But because this was perhaps the only case in the entire United States where election totals for Trump and Biden were reversed, and because Antrim County used machines manufactured by Dominion voting systems, the target of pro-Trump conspiracy theorists, the Michigan County became a banner waved by Trump, his top election lawyers Rudy Giuliani and Sidney Powell, and the fascist right as a whole. So it's important to point out, again, even that election mistake in Antrim County was because a Trump loyalist miscounted the votes or made a mistake or an error. It was not part of some Democratic Party conspiracy or some sort of, intentional malfeasance. Yet, that was just enough. That was just what, Trump and his acolytes, Giuliani and Sidney Powell needed around the 2020 election. So, going on, talking a little bit more about Karamo, they're a community college instructor from Oak Park in the Detroit suburbs and a member of the Black Leadership Committee of Right to Life Michigan, the main anti-abortion group in the state. She became a prominent voice of the stolen election campaign, making bogus claims of fraud in the counting of ballots in Detroit, where she was a Republican observer. Fox News and other far-right media outlets portrayed her as a whistleblower, and Trump embraced her claims of vote fraud in Detroit, although he actually received more votes in the city in 2020 than he did in 2016, when he narrowly carried the state. The shift towards the Democrats in 2020 came mainly in the Detroit suburbs and in suburban areas around other cities, including Grand Rapids and Lansing. Two Republican hopefuls who opposed DePerno and Karamo argued that the two were running so far to the right, including embracing the conspiracy theories peddled by the QAnon internet theory, that the two would alienate independent and moderate voters and lose in the general election to the Democratic incumbents. DePerno has called for investigating and prosecuting Nessel, Benson, and Governor Gretchen Whitmer on charges of official misconduct relating to the 2020 elections and the enforcement of mitigation policies against the COVID-19 pandemic. It was the pandemic issue, worth noting, that made Whitmer the target of a fascist kidnap and murder conspiracy in 2020. And I think I just want to close out this section. Again, I hope I've given you more context and food for thought about who these candidates are. I know we've talked about them before on the show, but just thinking through we started off that interview with Catherine Joyce. We talked about, Matthew DePerno's rhetoric about critical race theory. There was this, I don't usually just read straight up tweets on the show, but there's this one that went around that I think really encapsulates what a lot of this hysteria from the right wing is coming from about quote unquote critical race theory, or the children learning the truth about our history in schools. And I'm just going to read this. It's a quote from Charles M. Blow. And I think they're onto something here. They really hit the nail on the head. During the summer protests after the murder of George Floyd, millions of people, including incredible numbers of white kids, marched in defense of black lives. This shook the white conservative establishment to its core. In their minds, their children had been indoctrinated. All of the CRT panic, book banning, and anti-protest laws are a direct response to this. They're trying to push white children's exposure to and sympathy for racial issues back to the dark ages of Jim Crow ignorance. It is as simple as it is shocking. So with that, we're going to take a quick little break. I think that's a good segue, though, into broader discussions and updates about what is going on with Patrick Lyoya and all the pertinent updates related to his murder by the Grand Rapids Police Department. Y'all are listening to Media Cyphers only on 89.1 WIDR Kalamazoo, your only source for political revolution. We are back. This is Media Cyphers, only on 89.1 WIDR Kalamazoo. So, if you're just joining us, just gave you some updates about some of the local statewide candidates who the GOP is fronting this next election cycle. Big about the election lies in 2020 and dismantling CRT, whatever they think it is. Next, we're going to give you some updates about what is going on, how working people around the state of Michigan are responding to the murder of Patrick Lyoya by the Grand Rapids Police Department. And specifically, we now have the name of the officer. It was, Officer Christopher Schur, who had joined the department back in 2015. But with that, I'm going to read this article from the World Socialist website, which did some really good coverage about some of the local demonstrations that happened here in the state of Michigan. So, headline is, demonstrations in Lansing and Detroit demand officer who killed Patrick Lyoya be charged and prosecuted for murder. It's written by Kevin Reed, published on April 24th. Both demonstrations expressed the widespread anger and disgust of the public toward the brutal execution-style killing that was captured completely on smartphone video by the passenger, who was in Lyoya's car when he was pulled over 8:10 a.m. in the residential neighborhood on the southwest side of the city in western Michigan. Although the policeman's body cam video shows the officer pulling Lyoya over and, after the young man gets out of his car and asks why he was being stopped, the officer telling him that the plate didn't belong on his car. Grand Rapids Police Department Chief Winstrom has subsequently said that the reason for the pullover has not been disclosed by law enforcement yet. On Sunday, that would be last Sunday, a group of activists rallied in front of the Spirit of Detroit statue and marched up Woodward Avenue before staging a die-in near the intersection of Adams Avenue in downtown Detroit. The protesters carried signs that said "Justice for Patrick Lyoya" and "Arrest the cop who murdered Patrick Lyoya." The demonstration was organized by Detroit Heals Detroit, along with the Michigan chapter of March for Our Lives and Protect Our Stolen Treasures. The protesters also carried signs with the names and drawings of Shelley Hilliard, Ayanna Jones, and Ora Rosser, 3 African Americans who were killed in Michigan since 2010 due to police violence and negligence. On Thursday afternoon, 200 protesters assembled at St. Luke Lutheran Church in Lansing and marched to the Michigan State Capitol building, demanding justice for Patrick Lyoya and calling for the name of the police officer who shot him to be released and for him to be fired and prosecuted. The march and rally in Lansing, including the participation of Patrick's parents, Peter and Dorcas Lyoya, as well as other members of the Lyoya family and Congolese refugee community. The demonstration was reminiscent of the nationwide and international protests that began in May 2020 following the murder of George Floyd by the Minneapolis police, and that many arrived with their own handmade signs and some traveled long distances to participate. At the rally, on the steps of the Capitol building, Patrick's parents spoke powerfully through an interpreter who translated their native Swahili into English. Peter Lyoya spoke of the grief the family and the Congolese community suffered when they saw the video of his son being executed by the Grand Rapids police officer. He explained why the family came to America and that they thought they would be saving their lives, but instead they came and lost our firstborn son. He concluded by saying, "I need justice for my son Patrick." Dorcas Lyoya said her heart was deeply broken. "I thought I brought my son here so that he could have a safe place. We ran away because there was a violent killing and war, but I'm so surprised to see that this is where I lost my son." A World Socialist website reporting team was present at the Lansing March and rally and spoke with protesters. Barney said, "I'm here because the black man got killed, shot in the back of the head in Grand Rapids, Michigan, for no reason. The cop was probably a rookie or whatever, but somebody should have told him about that and stopped killing us. I've been handcuffed and stomped on by the police. If it wasn't for a white person, then I would never be here right now because that white person saved my life, and that's my story." Probably referring to a bystander. There's just broader context there. Nadia, a high school student from Grand Rapids, said she came to the state capitol to demand justice for Patrick and added, "My grandmother marched with Martin Luther King. It's really tragic that we still haven't addressed these issues. Police brutality today happens even more often than it did in her day." Mark, a General Motors auto worker, said, "I see people getting killed by the police, and I don't know what to do about it. It gets worse and worse. It's worse now than when I was 20 years old, and I'm 65 now." When asked what he thought about the presence of the Democrats at the rally, he said, "This seems to be happening even more in cities where they're in charge. Places like Milwaukee, Chicago, New York are famous for police violence." Speaking about the fact that the Lyoya family fled the Democratic Republic of Congo to escape violence, Mark said, "This man came over here from a country where there's a civil war raging because he thought he would be safe here. It's a real shame that apparently America proved to be just as dangerous for him." And just a quick note, last week we did a detailed breakdown of precisely how the instability in the Democratic Republic of Congo happened. So look out for that. I think we'll be putting that in our next podcast episode if you want some more context there. Spoiler alert, American imperialism had a lot to do with it. On the claim that racism is exclusively the cause of police violence, Mark added, "That's not working out for them too well. And they've been hiring more African-American police officers over here too, but that doesn't seem to be changing the situation for us. It's not like only white cops are involved in this." AJ, a music producer, said of the brutal manner in which Lyoya was killed, "He could have used a taser, he could have called for backup and used anything but lethal force, especially on somebody that wasn't even armed. I feel this march is bringing attention to this, and it's been happening all over America. They keep talking about giving police more training. Okay, well, when is the killing going to stop. AJ also spoke about the issues of race and police violence. Anybody that has any type of humanity should be behind this situation. It wouldn't matter if he was white, I'd still be behind this. Yasmin, a Palestinian student at Michigan State University, said she was opposed to the tactics frequently used by U.S. police, such as kneeling on the neck, which she has seen used by Israeli forces against Palestinians. Youssef, an immigrant student from Guinea, said, "I came today to show my support for the Lyoya family. I want to make sure that people know that shootings like this that happen all the time are unacceptable. We all have to work together as a people, as a country, and as a community to deliver justice, to deliver understanding, and to get past this issue." Indicating the cover-up that is underway and efforts to block demands by the public for a police officer to be brought to justice, the Detroit Free Press, and this is some really good media critique from World Socialist website here, just want to point that out before I read it. Indicating the cover-up that is underway and effort to block demands by the public for the police officer to be brought to justice, the Detroit Free Press ran a front-page story on Sunday that smeared Lyoya under the headline, "Records Interviews Reveal Patrick Lyoya's Complicated Life Before Grand Rapids Shooting." The ostensibly liberal Detroit newspaper went about the disgusting business of publishing details of Patrick's previous encounters with law enforcement and alleged acts of violence, and contrasted this to the perception of family, friends, and members of the Congolese community that he had a big heart, was a generous young man, and a go-to person among refugees. This campaign is being conducted by the media to condition the public to accept that no charges will be brought against the Grand Rapids officer on the grounds that he thought his life was in danger during the scuffle and his execution-style shooting of Lyoya was justified. As was explained to the Free Press reporters by Patrick's 26-year-old cousin, Prosper Latunda, who grew up in Africa with the deceased young man and was clearly angered by their questions, even if you've been arrested 100 times still, they can't kill you. And I'd like to add, it's no excuse for what that police officer did. Ben Johnson, a Detroit attorney working for the family, also said that Lyoya's prior arrests and convictions are irrelevant to what happened on the day that he was killed. What difference does it make? It has nothing to do with anything. Then Johnson added, so he deserved to be executed in the back of the head? So again, that is an article from World Socialist website. They had some reporters on the ground at the demonstrations that happened over the weekend. Headline was, "Demonstrations in Lansing and Detroit demand officer who killed Patrick Lyoya be charged and prosecuted for murder." So we're going to take a quick little break. When we come back, I think I want to give y'all some important COVID-related updates. We haven't talked about it, and some of the numbers are climbing back up, and it's important information for your everyday life. So keep it dialogue. This is Media Cyphers, only on 89.1 WIDR or online at widerfm.org, your only source for political revolution.
Updates from the Wider directors. Head on over to our website at widerfm.org.
Click on Weekly Newsletter tab.
Yes. The newsletter come up. I want to really read about all DJs, what they listen to, all these announcements.
You can also find an invite link to our Discord where we post updated information about upcoming shows, events, and all things Wider.
It's very exciting. This has been a message from 89.1 Wider FM, online at widrfm.org.
We are back. This is Media Cyphers, only on 89.1 WIDR. We're online at widerfm.org. So, want to give y'all an update about the COVID situation here at the county level. Again, we're starting to see cases climb up a little bit. So, as we've said many times on the show, the pandemic ain't over just because you really want it to be. And worth pointing out, again, federal government on down, everybody seems to just want to pretend that the pandemic is over, but it is not. It, in fact, is not. So, some dire news, but also some I wouldn't necessarily call it good news, maybe some less bad news in this article. So this is from Now Kalamazoo. It was written by Ben Jones, published on April 21st. Headline is COVID Update, Cases on the Way Back Up. New cases of COVID-19 are slowly but steadily moving back upward, so are hospitalizations. All fingers point to the BA2 variant. COVID rates are still far below the peak seen during the winter surge of the virus, but cases are slowly but steadily inching upwards in Michigan. State health officials on Wednesday reported 10,474 new cases of COVID-19 in the past week. That puts the average at 1,496 new cases per day. That's up by nearly 400 from a week earlier. Yet death numbers remain low over the past week, even decreasing a little bit. The state reported 78 deaths since last Wednesday, putting the average at 11.1 deaths per day. Other measurements of the pandemic ticked up slightly. Health officials reported that 532 people with COVID-19 were being treated in hospitals in the state. That's an increase of 36 people over last week's number. Hospitalizations have been moving up by single digits over the past week, suggesting that infections are worsening, but only a little bit. Meanwhile, the state's positivity rate passed 7% on Tuesday. In the prior week, 7.2% of COVID-19 tests conducted in the state returned positive results. That's after reaching nearly 3% a month ago. Epidemiologists say the current rise may be caused by a new version of the Omicron variant that has been spreading around the world. The BA2 subvariant seems to be more contagious than its older sibling, but doesn't seem to cause worse infections. Experts told the Detroit News they don't expect another surge of the pandemic, or they don't expect another surge of the pandemic before summer comes. Infection rates are also on the rise in Kalamazoo County. Like the rest of the state, the increases have been slow but steady. Health officials reported 220 new cases of the coronavirus since last Wednesday, putting the average at 31.4 new cases per day. Rates hit a low of 19 new cases per day 2 weeks ago. The state reported 2 new COVID deaths in Kalamazoo County in the last week. That kept the average steady at 0.3 deaths per day. Hospitalizations are on the rise in Kalamazoo County, but not by much. The county's 2 hospitals reported 23 patients with COVID-19 on Monday, just 1 more than last week and 3 more than 2 weeks ago. The real stunning increase in the positivity rate, was in the positivity rate in the county. In the week ending Tuesday, 11.8 of COVID tests returned positive results. That's up significantly from the 5% low reported a month ago. So I want to emphasize a couple things. Again, going back to the same rules that we had when this all started, I want y'all to understand, even if you're very healthy, even if, you've been vaccinated and think you have some resistance to, the pandemic and such, COVID can have very bizarre and odd side effects, very wide range of them, sustained and long-lasting fatigue. There's even been some studies that show hearing loss can even occur. So COVID-19, regardless of how healthy you may be, is not something you want to get or you want to catch. So, I again continue to recommend everybody, please continue to mask up. Regardless of what your Republican uncle or conservative uncle says, masking up is very important and it's very easy and it can help prevent us from spreading this around to each other. Also keep in mind, first and foremost, that we are doing these kinds of, we're trying to be cautious because of the most vulnerable among us. There are those out there with immunodeficiencies and weakened immune systems that are not going to be able to take a COVID infection like you or I would. And we need to have the empathy and compassion to behave as though if you don't have anybody in your life that fits that description, act as though you do. Because you never know who knows who and who has contact with whom. And we need to, again, try to protect the most vulnerable among us during this prolonged season of plague, I should say. Which again, season of plague, which would have been a lot shorter if we didn't live in a capitalist hellscape that seeks to throw workers into the volcano and get the economy going back to normal as quick as possible, regardless of whether it's the most sensible thing to do during a pandemic. So, with that, I wanted to also touch on, we got a quick hit to do, and then we'll do another quick break. But a little bit of good news. It's important. I know we share a lot of dour and dire stuff on this program. So anytime we get some good stuff to share, it's worth doing. So Dana Nessel and Consumers Energy did reach a settlement to end the use of coal in Michigan. Now, there's a lot of caveats to that, but I think at the end of the day, that is a good thing when you have one of the biggest energy conglomerates vow to stop using one of the dirtiest sources of energy. So it's published on April 20th by 9 and 10 News. Attorney General Dana Nessel and Consumers Energy have reached a settlement agreement that will see consumers ending its use of coal in Michigan by 2025. The proposed settlement is still subject to final approval by the Michigan Public Service Commission. Once approved, consumers will end its use of coal 15 years earlier than originally planned. According to consumers, it will be one of the first utilities in the country to end its use of coal. In addition, the settlement provides for the building of nearly 8,000 additional megawatts of solar energy by 2040. Consumers plans to generate 90% of its electricity using clean energy resources by 2040. Again, not nearly quickly enough, but better than nothing, I guess. Anyway, not only is this settlement a win for our environment, it's also a win for Michigan ratepayers who have struggled to stay current on their bills, Nessel said. The agreement was truly a collaborative effort from all involved parties and a symbol of what we can achieve when stakeholders work together to create positive change. The settlement also provides the following. 1. Establishment of a regulatory asset for the underappreciated book balance of the retiring coal plants, which will earn a return equal to... Okay, that's pretty long and complicated, but basically talks about like how these coal plants will be kind of recycled back into our infrastructure. Approval of the acquisition of new covert generating natural gas facility, but avoids the acquisition of an additional gas plant proposed by the company, its application, and approval of demand response and conservation voltage reduction capital cost. So that's kind of buried in there. That is probably my biggest problem with this is, okay, so you're approving a natural gas facility, which is... it may not be as dirty as coal, but fracking is a terrible practice that creates a lot of CO2 and causes great destruction to the environment and, human and the health of humans and wildlife. So it is kind of like, you've been seeing this a lot from Democrats lately. It's kind of bait and switch. It's like, oh, see, we're going to shift down from, say, coal or some of these other targets, but we're still going to be, allowing these drilling permits and stuff like that. You've definitely seen this accelerate too since the Ukraine conflict popped off. But yeah, I should really mention half measures ain't going to do it. We either solve the climate crisis or we put ourselves on a path towards extinction. And that's, something we've talked about the show many times throughout the years. But it is worth putting a fine point on it. These kind of half measures ain't great. And yeah, you give Dana Nessel and consumers a cookie. I mean, maybe we should have slightly less existential dread, but if anything, we should be putting public pressure on them to do more. So I think I'll just leave it there. We're going to take another quick break. I've got a couple more subjects I want to hit on before we close out the show. Again, talking about kind of the imperial effects of Ukraine and how that relates to our increasing gas and food prices. And if we have time, maybe talk a little bit about the strike and unionization wave that's been going on around the country. Or maybe you don't have to do the union one first. So, y'all are listening to Media Cyphers only on 89.1 WIDR, your only source for a political revolution.
Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention, please?
Make sure you follow us on Instagram to keep up to date with what's going on here at Wider. Also, check out our website, updated weekly by some of our amazing staff, online at widrfm.org.
Y'all are listening to Media Cyphers only on 89.1 WIDR or online at widerfm.org. Quick reminder, you can also find us on Facebook and YouTube. And we've got a podcast. We put together some of the best material from our week-to-week radio shows. Something you can easily listen to and download. That's Media Cyphers Kalamazoo. You should be able to find it on most podcasting apps. So the next thing I want to talk about, you know what, a little bit more good news. Let's do some more good news. Some good news about labor organizing and how Starbucks has really taken off. The employees of Starbucks have really taken off when it comes to organizing their workplace. So this is an article on Common Dreams written by Jake Johnson. It was published earlier today. Headline is, An Enormous Inspiration. More than 30 Starbucks locations have voted to unionize. We are not going to let billionaire union busters stand in our way, said one Starbucks employee. Overcoming increasingly aggressive opposition from the company's management, workers at more than 30 Starbucks locations across the U.S. have now voted to unionize as the wave of organizing spurred by historic wins in Buffalo just 4 months ago continues to mount. On Monday, workers at a Starbucks shop in the township of Hopewell, New Jersey, voted unanimously to unionize and join Workers United, an affiliate of the Service Employees International Union. The store was the 30th Starbucks location to unionize in the U.S. and the first in New Jersey. We are incredibly proud of the brave and strong Starbucks workers who voted to join Workers United, Lynn Fox, the international president of the union, said in a statement. Our collective success in Hopewell today reflects the power that working people have to demand positive changes from their employers. Senator Bernie Sanders, who rallied with Starbucks workers in Virginia over the weekend, congratulated the Hopewell employees and said that workers' efforts to demand dignity on the job have been an enormous inspiration to working-class people from coast to coast. The Hopewell victory was followed by a union win in Baltimore, the first Starbucks location in Maryland to unionize, and announcements from several more shops in California, Washington State, and Texas that they intend to join the rapidly spreading movement. The growing momentum comes as Starbucks management, led by billionaire CEO Howard Schultz, is working to ramp up a union-busting campaign that has already resulted in several lawsuits from the National Labor Relations Board. On Friday, the NLRB sued the coffee corporation for unlawfully retaliating against three union organizers in Phoenix, Arizona. Among other things, the NLRB alleged Starbucks disciplined, suspended, and discharged one employee, constructively discharged another one, and placed a third on an unpaid leave of absence after revoking recently granted accommodations. Nevertheless, Starbucks organizing continues to gain steam as workers at the e-commerce behemoth Amazon are also attempting to unionize a second Staten Island warehouse. Efforts that advocates hope will galvanize a labor movement that has suffered for decades amid corporate America's concerted offensive. Last week, after Schultz said that Starbucks and other U.S. companies are quote-unquote being assaulted by the threat of unionization, 5 Starbucks locations in Richmond, Virginia voted to form a union by a combined margin of 82 to 14. The 5 for 5 yes vote shows that Richmond is a union town, and this is just the beginning, and we are not going to let a corporation silence our voices, Starbucks employee Jillian O'Hare told the local Richmond Times-Dispatch. We are not going to let billionaire union busters stand in our way. Longtime labor journalist Stephen Greenhouse tweeted Monday that Howard Schultz's big anti-union campaign seems like a dud that's backfiring. Starbucks has hired the notorious anti-union law firm Littler Mendelson to assist its push to blunt worker organizing, which Schultz has tried to portray as a scheme led by a quote-unquote outside group. After Starbucks management keeps losing so badly in union vote after union vote, one would think Howard Schultz would decide, hey, our anti-union campaign isn't working, let's drop it, Greenhouse wrote. But Schultz evidently plans to double down on his anti-union push and make things more divisive. Starbucks workers who have voted to unionize in pursuit of better pay, benefits, and conditions now face the arduous task of negotiating a contract with a hostile employer, a process that can take years. An Economic Policy Institute study published in 2009 found that within 1 year after the election, only 48% of organized units have collective bargaining agreements. By 2 years, it increases to 63%, and by 3 years to 70%, EPI noted. Only after more than 3 years will 75% have obtained a first agreement. During a rally in Virginia on Sunday, Sanders said to Cheer that our demand right now is to tell Mr. Schultz and the people who run Starbucks, stop the anti-union activities, stop bringing people back into stop bringing people back into back rooms, and stop threatening people and stop intimidating people. And equally important, the Vermont senator added, start negotiating a first contract with those shops who have voted to form a union. And again, that's a quick write-up on some of the union victories Starbucks workers are having across the country. It was written by Jake Johnson over at Common Dreams, and headline is, an enormous inspiration. More than 30 Starbucks locations have voted to unionize. I think I'm going to do another very quick break, and when we come back, I've got one last article here to talk about. Again, kind of great article from Left Voice that threads the needle between our high gas and food prices and the imperialist cluster F going on in Ukraine right now. Y'all are listening to Media Cyphers only on 89.1 WIDR or online at widerfm.org. You can also find our show online. We have a Facebook page. You can check out our page on YouTube and Media Cyphers podcast. That's Media Cyphers Kalamazoo. You can look it up just about any podcast app. Anyway, we will be right back. Y'all are listening to Media Cyphers, your only source for political revolution.
Hey, this is Wider reminding you not to text and drive. We'll provide the music, you just sit back, relax, and drive safe.
And we are back. This is Media Cyphers only on 89.1 WIDR Kalamazoo or online at widerfm.org. It's got one more story for you. We're going to take it up to the international level. And I wanted to read from this really brilliant article from Left Voice. Like I said, really makes the connection between our high fuel and food prices and imperialism. So, again, the name of the article is titled Angry About High Fuel and Food Prices? Blame Imperialism. It's written by Sam Carliner and Scott Cooper, published on April 22nd. Supply chain issues, largely triggered by the global pandemic and now exacerbated by the war in Ukraine, have created the worst inflation in decades. In the United States, inflation jumped 8.5% in March of this year from March of 2021, the fastest jump to occur since 1981 and the highest level of inflation since that year. This has resulted in especially high food and gasoline prices. U.S. politicians are already using one of their typical go-to responses when workers find it particularly difficult to afford meeting their basic needs. Blame someone else. President Biden is trying to get the label Putin's price hike to stick, while Republicans are directing blame at the president, pushing the term Bidenflation. Well, it is, and that's just a clumsy term, by the way. Can't all be winners. Anyway, while it's true that Putin's invasion of Ukraine and Biden's response in the form of economic warfare on Russians have both contributed to rising prices, the roots of this inflation crisis lie in the capitalist system, not in the war alone. In our globalized imperialist economy, high gasoline prices, for instance, are linked directly to the inevitable economic crises that capitalism produces over and over, and to the response of the capitalists themselves, which is always to make the workers pay. The pandemic demonstrated to many people a key fact about how capitalism works in our imperialist epoch. No national economy functions in complete isolation from the global economy. If one sector of production and transportation is slowed down in any part of the world, many other parts of the global economy will be affected. This was clearly demonstrated when a single cargo ship stuck in the Suez Canal had far-reaching economic consequences that rippled across the globe. In times of crisis, the cost of producing goods almost always goes up, and when supply chains are disrupted, there are fewer of those goods available. With fewer goods getting to consumers, the products that are available get priced higher. Unlike the Suez Canal blockage, which was a case of one transport component of the global supply chain being disrupted, the pandemic affected every single country and nearly every single component of the supply chain. This disruption of the usual flow of commodities around the world has had an impact on nearly every commodity. Those commodities are the basic products people need to live, like gasoline for cars and food for families. And as prices rise and the capitalists profit from those higher prices, the desperation of most people increases. Inflation was a serious issue prior to the start of war in Ukraine. So what does any of this have to do with the Russian invasion? Again, when one part of the supply chain is disrupted, that disruption ripples through the world economy. As the 8th largest producer of wheat in the world, Ukraine is essential to the world's supply and distribution of that commodity, something the war is grinding to a halt. Already, experts are anticipating that the war will result in famines in the Middle East and Africa, two regions dependent on wheat from Ukraine as well as from Russia, the world's 3rd largest producer. The two countries combine to account for about a quarter of total world exports of wheat. And this next part is really perverse. It really talks about just the artificial nature of the scarcity that we're talking about. One might think that the problem of potential famine could be solved by the United States, the world's 4th largest producer of wheat and 3rd largest exporter of grain. But as a profound illustration of how capitalism functions against the interests of meeting actual human needs, the rising prices are threatening the U.S. crop and potential exports that could help address a looming famine. Farmers are finding that the actions of speculators in the commodities future markets, betting on reaping huge profits later on, are making it difficult for them to sell their wheat and get it into the global supply chain today. Silos are full, and some wheat is literally just sitting there. For workers in the global south, this could mean starvation, but what is effectively hoarding has consequences for U.S. workers as well. Left unaddressed, the United States may be facing its own food crisis soon enough. However, for many workers in the United States, the immediate concern is the price of gasoline. Again, it is the globalized economy for profit with supply chains and distribution networks that is creating the economic burden on workers. The United States and NATO countries responded to Russia's invasion of Ukraine with economic sanctions aimed at isolating Russia's economy from the global economy. In addition, Germany canceled a long-anticipated Nord Stream 2 pipeline, which is going to supply more Russian natural gas to Europe, which already uses a lot. By cutting Russia off from the world in this way, prices rise because there is less overall supply, and the Western capitalists, who may no longer be competing with Russian oil on the market, see an opportunity to make greater profits. Politicians and the capitalist media have been painting these price increases as a small price to pay for freedom, but for the working class, higher gasoline poses tough questions about how to use limited resources. Buy gas to drive to work, but not, say, to visit family across town or elsewhere. Buy fewer or cheaper, less nutritious groceries to feed the family, and other serious economic hardships. So what does imperialism have to do with higher food and fuel prices? Well, as Lenin explained, imperialism is the stage of capitalist development in which monopolies merge with banks to form finance capital, a type of capital that can control the markets of entire countries and even regions of the world. Nation-states act to serve and expand the influence of their national finance capital, resulting in competition between nation-states for spheres of influence. Given that capitalist economies cannot function properly without constant growth, and the world has finite resources, this means that wealthy capitalist countries are always seeking to expand their spheres of influence. Lenin reached this conclusion about capitalist development in 1916, describing imperialism as the quote-unquote highest stage of capitalism. Since then, the world economy has become far more globalized. Western imperialism has fueled the war in Ukraine. The United States and the Western European imperialist countries have sought to expand their economic influence in the former Soviet bloc countries of Eastern Europe, and one key to this has been to make Ukraine a sort of semi-colony that would provide privileged access to the country's most valuable resources and labor pool. Helping prop up Ukrainian politicians like Zelensky, who cater to Western capitalist interests, is part of that scheme. Putin, seeking to maintain what he sees as a key part of Russia's sphere of influence and security, has retaliated. In many respects, a war in Ukraine was inevitable. The logic of capitalism pushes the imperialist countries to create more profit, and often the only way to do that is through increasing the exploitation of labor and resources beyond those countries' own borders. In a world with limited resources, growth can continue only as long until one imperialist power reaches a point of direct conflict with another imperialist power, or threatens a regional power like Russia. In short, wars are inevitable as long as capitalism and imperialism remain the systems that define how the world's resources are acquired and used. Workers outraged about high food and gasoline prices are right to direct their anger at both Putin and Biden, and there is little relief in sight. As the Boston Globe reports, some bourgeois economists, former government officials, and financial titans are starting to warn of the risk of a recession striking any time between late this year and 2024, all resulting from the Federal Reserve raising interest rates to try to combat the inflation. That has been exacerbated by the war in Ukraine and continued supply chain problems from COVID-19. A recession would mean lost jobs and decreased household income, and would hit the vulnerable the hardest. Even when the overall economy recovers, those workers and their families are typically left behind. The Great Recession of 2008 led to skyrocketing unemployment and disrupted the lives of millions, many of whom have never gotten back to anywhere close to their pre-2008 circumstances. This is the price we pay from a system that pushes the world into conflicts and crises and then forces workers to pay for them. There are actions workers in the United States can take now in response to the current inflation, such as demanding wages that automatically adjust to the cost of living. But we must also fight for an international system that doesn't make the next economic crisis inevitable. That begins with extending our solidarity as economically strained workers in wealthy countries to workers in the global south facing famines, Ukrainian workers violently pitted against Western capital and Russian capital, and Russian workers suffering from the U.S. NATO economic warfare. It means opposing the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the U.S. NATO intervention, including weapons shipments and sanctions. All that requires a genuinely anti-imperialist, anti-war movement that touches every corner of the globe. And again, that is an article from Left Voice. Title is Angry About High Fuel and Food Prices, Blame Imperialism, written by Sam Carliner and Scott Cooper. All right, I think with that, we're going to sign off just a little bit early. Y'all have been listening to Media Cyphers only on 89.1 WIDR or online at widerfm.org. You can also find Media Cyphers online at Facebook. We also have a YouTube page where we upload every episode as you hear it on the radio from front to back. And we also have a podcast where we take the best material from our radio show and put it together in about 2 to 3 episodes a month. That's Media Cyphers Kalamazoo, and you can find it on just about any podcasting app. Stay tuned at 2 o'clock. I will switch hats. I'll put on my DJ Danger Groove hat, and we will be doing some electro-pop therapy. Until then, and until next time, keep on fighting for that revolution solution.